Hi, I'm Ron James, and this is another special edition of Space Time. I have with me here in the studio Michael Schratt. Michael is one of the unsung heroes of ufology. This is a guy who has dedicated his life to doing some very unique research and the creation of some very special records. Mike, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Ron, for having me be on your show. That's great.
I really appreciate you coming down.
Sure, no problem.
You have made a contribution to the field of ufology that is unique and complex. Tell the audience a little bit about what you've done.
What I've tried to do and endeavor, it's kind of a crusade, is I want to maintain an important part of our national history, but do it through a way that is visual, that people can actually be at these locations through the use of illustrations to make these cases come alive. And so that's my crusade.
So you've done a bunch of cases, and let's talk about some of the mediums that you use, because I know that you've built, had 3D CAD models done that you could actually build paper models of craft. I know that you've done a lot of from simple to super complex illustrations. Some of them you've commissioned and some of them you've done yourself. How many cases have you done?
Well, there's 302 binders and counting at this point. And within those, there's, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of cases perhaps. So there's enough material to keep on going to the next ice age. And the way I created these were basically, once you get the research done and you have a sketch that's really rough and pencil sketch that might be 50 years old, we wanted to bring it up to modern day standards. So a SolidWorks model was created. From there, a drawing was made, kind of a 3D. And if it was a point where it was beyond my capabilities, I commissioned the artwork. And then if it was something that had relatively simple angles, then I went ahead and built a 3D cardstock model that you can print out and actually build.
Now, you've got some binders right there to your right. Can you just bring one of those up and set it here? I want people to get kind of an idea of the scope of your work.
So this is a typical binder right here. And there's enough firepower in that binder to pretty much destroy any UFO cover-up. And they're all documented, they're all referenced, they all have the testimony, the sketches. It's not like something I just pulled out. It's actual boots on the ground research that's referenced.
And you say you've got almost 300 of these?
There's a lot of them, yes.
I mean, that's an incredible body of work.
Correct.
And you've gone through these cases, you've selected the ones that you think deserve the most attention, and then done whatever you can with the resources
to make it come alive, yes. Correct.
So what makes you decide to use a certain case?
It has to have at least 3 criteria. It has to have a drawing, a sketch, and illustration. It has to have at least a 3-page report, and then it has to have a flight page report as well. When you put that all together, I'll take that case.
Wow. So what do you do for your day job?
I work within the defense industry.
Okay.
Yep.
So, you've done a few conferences and stuff where
Sure.
you've talked about some of the technology, and have you ever had conflicts with your work?
Basically, I'm going to stick to my historical UFO cases, and that's what I'm going to do.
There's a deeper story there that's pretty interesting, and I think that's probably the best decision that you can make. Let's talk for a minute about the topic of the day, which seems to be crash retrievals. There's a lot of new evidence, no smoking gun yet, okay, here's a piece of metal put into the civilian vernacular for us to explore and understand. But there's a whole lot of whispers going around behind the scenes that the evidence from crash debris may be something closer than any of the other stuff that we're going to get. We don't know, obviously, but you've done a lot of research on crashes.
Sure.
And so let's talk a little bit about that, because people think, oh, well, there might have been Roswell, that was something. But from what you told me earlier, there's well over 100 that were documented by other researchers that you have then followed up on and expanded on. Let's talk about rumored crashes, and then let's talk about the ones that seem to have the best body of whatever evidence we have.
Okay. So looking within the Leonard Stringfield collection, and that's 85 3-ring binders, there were approximately 119 alleged crash retrieval cases. Now, we can't prove all of them. We just can't. It's impossible. Are some of them hoaxes? Probably, without a doubt. But you can't discount all of them, because a lot of these cross-correlate. And so it appears in 2022 that we're inching forward to something. I want to ask you, do you feel we're going to see anything significant in 2022?
I think that we're going to see a few more drops of the slow drip, drip, drip of disclosure.
Right.
I don't think we're going to have anything super explosive unless somebody like you or me or somebody in the civilian realm is able to actually dig something up that's concrete. These guys are going to hold on to this information till the last possible minute.
That's true.
Whatever it is that's governing what's going to cause that last minute. I've got my own theories. But no, I think 2022 is going to be relatively uneventful.
Okay, so you talked about crash.
Except for my movie.
Ah, I see, okay. Why don't we investigate Roswell and we'll try to make it come alive through the use of illustrations. You cool with that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I brought along some of our drawings here, and we'll break it down basically one by one here. So we're going to start over here. When we talk about Roswell, we're not talking about one specific event. There are, in point of fact, 4 events as well, total. If you look down on this map here, you've got Roswell on the bottom, you've got the impact site, you've got the second body site, and then you have something called the debris field and also the touchdown site. So we're talking about multiple things at the same time. So July 2nd, 1949, 11:59 p.m., that's where the debris field was seen here. This is the area where Mac Brazel and 7-year-old Timothy D. Proctor, they came across the debris. Now, 5 miles north of the debris field is something called the touchdown site, where Lincoln LaPaz, who is a meteorite expert, and Louis Rickett, who is a 509th Bomb Group member, they discovered fused green glass in the sand, which is indicative of high heat. So that's one thing. They also found, which is not talked about almost at all, a seamless black box that was the size just smaller than a breadboard box, which we don't even know today if it was opened. So 75 years later, they may never have even opened up this black box. We don't know what's inside. I don't even know if they've opened it yet. So that's something to look at. So here we've got the touchdown site, we've got the debris field. Now the trajectory was from the northwest to the southeast, and so that's what you see with this arrow here. This is the impact site where they recovered at least 2 bodies and 1 survivor. 2.5 miles west of the impact site is the second body site where they recovered 2 more bodies. So the grand total is 5 bodies recovered and 1 was still alive. So that's the layout of what we'll be talking about here. Now, let me break it down to you. This is the morning of July 2nd, 1947. This is in the morning. And what they discovered, well, actually, it's July 3rd, 1947. Here you have Mac Brazel, rancher Mac Brazel, and then 7-year-old Timothy D. Proctor come across this debris field. And there's thousands of pieces of this strange debris. They also noticed that there was a 200-foot-long gash that was 10 feet wide, embedded and entrenched into the soil at the time. So it's pretty much been confirmed that there was a gouge within the landscape. And you can see that it's this flat landscape. There's almost no trees. It's got some shrubbery and some bushes, but this is typically what you'll see when you go out into the Roswell, New Mexico area. This is the kind of landscape that you're going to see. So this is essentially scene 1. Now, I'm going to continue on, and we're going to move on to scene 2 here. And now we are at the crash site. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the crash site. What was recovered was an egg-shaped craft that had a hull breach on the side of it. There was a dome on top, about the size of a Volkswagen. So we're talking about 16 feet across. Again, hull breach on the side of the craft. Now, according to Don Schmidt, this took place within the vicinity, plus or minus 200 feet of a windmill and a water tank. That's how we gauge where this took place. Now, they also had an 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy that was called onto the scene from the 509th Bomb Group. There was at least 1 Jeep, a 6x troop transport, and then an ambulance. And this is where they had and retrieved the survivor. So this is essentially scene 2 in this retrieval operation. Now, we should consider the fact that the bodies were left out into the desert, exposed to the elements for basically the night of the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, and then it wasn't until the 7th when the military was called on site where they began the retrieval operation. So whatever critters were out there, whatever environmental things were going on, these bodies were exposed for multiple days. So this is now July 8th, 1947. The retrieval operation is in full gear. They have brought the small egg-shaped craft onto the 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy. They put a tarp completely concealing the craft whatsoever. There wasn't one thing shown. It was completely concealed. And they put chains and ropes over the tarp and were going down Main Street heading toward Hangar P3 Building 84 at the base. So that's essentially our next scene. Now I'm going to take you inside the hangar for an unprecedented look inside the hangar now. This is Hangar P3 Building 84, which you can still go to today if you make reservations. You can actually stand within plus or minus 2 feet of where they laid out the bodies. So we'll look off to the left here. You've got the ambulance truck. In the background, you've got a wooden crate that they were building. That was for the quote-unquote child-sized caskets, which were brought and put inside the wooden crate here. We've got some of the bodies laid out in the foreground here. You've got that 18-wheeler tractor-trailer lowboy. Now, I want to make a point that by this time, ladies and gentlemen, the body flights had already begun, because the first body flight was in a C-54 piloted by Pappy Henderson. That flew directly to Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. The second body flight was by a B-29 that went to 8th Air Force, Fort Worth, Texas. So this is the interior of the hangar shot. Now, we'll move forward. What happened next? Well, they had to load this crate containing the caskets with the bodies into the B-29. The way they do that is they put it in something called the atomic bomb pit at Roswell Armory Airfield, 519th Bomb Group. So they would lower this crate into the atomic bomb pit. They would taxi a B-29 over it. They would open up the bomb bay, and then they would just like hydraulically lift this crate into the bomb bay of the B-29. However, prior to that whole operation, they built 2 perimeter screens around this crate inside the atomic bomb pit. Why, ladies and gentlemen, if this is a weather balloon, would you have armed guards protecting a weather balloon? Ron, would you comment on that?
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense.
None whatsoever.
Right? Something more going on here.
And plus, everything's in a crate, so this extra layer of protection and concealment really points to the fact that this was something significant.
Something else, exactly. Okay, so we'll go ahead and take it to the next scene here. And now we see B-29 straight flush, which has been scrapped. It doesn't exist anymore, but that's the B-29 that taxied over the atomic bomb pit. They brought up the crate inside, and then this particular B-29 flew directly to 8th Air Force, Fort Worth, Texas. We'll move on to the next scene now in our series here. This is the autopsy that took place inside the Aeromedical Lab at Wright Field at the time. And you can see they've begun the process, and the documents, the autopsy photographs, all of the reference medical records allegedly were stored inside the Aeromedical Lab at Wright-Patterson. But this is not where our story ends. This is not where our story ends. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. There was a survivor to the Roswell crash retrieval. There was a survivor. Now, I want to take you to Montgomery Field, Alabama. We have a gentleman named Marion Black Mac Magruder, who single-handedly was responsible for teaching America night fighting operations. Prior to that time, we didn't know anything about night fighting. We had to send this guy over to Britain, learn it there, because they were the ones who invented radar before Americans did. So he came back with that knowledge. He wrote a complete manual that was produced, and we're now at April 1948. This is after the crash took place, and we're talking about 18 members of our top pilots. There are 2 groups of 18 pilots who received a call from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to immediately board a plane. They flew to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. They were ushered into this room, kind of like what we see here, but there were chairs there. And then 2 men walked in with these boxes, and inside the boxes, according to Marion Black Mac Magruder, they were specifically told that this is debris from the Roswell craft. And they were handing this debris off to these pilots, and the government, the reason why they were there is the government wanted to get their opinion and their demeanor. Would it be acceptable to them? Would they freak out? Would it be something that would go against their religious convictions? Or was this something that they could accept? They wanted to gauge their reaction because they were debating whether this should be released to the public. That's the reason why they were there. Now, once they saw all that, the real surprise came later. They were brought down a corridor, they made a left-hand turn, they were brought into a little bit larger room, into a windowless room that had a one-way mirror at the back wall. And there, not only were they shown dead corpses, but they were shown the survivor. And he was about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. He had an enlarged head. He had kind of a squiggly Casper the Ghost type demeanor on his body and limbs, longer arms, kind of a slit for a mouth, barely 2 nostrils for a nose, almost hairless completely, and oversized eyes. Now, Ron, I have a surprise for you. I have a world exclusive drawing. I commissioned this from my good friend Rudy Girardeau. He's the person who put this together. So we put all the eyewitness testimony from Black Mac Magruder, everything that Don Schmitt had talked about in Case Closed, the Roswell incident, latest book, everything we've heard from Pappy Henderson about the bodies, and we put that all together, and I have a world exclusive drawing for you that I'm going to hit with you right now. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is what the survivor looked like. And we've got the pilots looking inside the one-way mirror, and this is about the closest we're ever going to see until we see the actual body themselves. But this is consistent with what the pilots had reported. It jives with the squiggly accounts. It jives with the Casper the Ghost, with this very frail body, and it tracks with what Don Schmitt had talked about in Case Closed Roswell. So this is kind of a world exclusive, first time it's ever been seen.
So let me ask you this.
Yep.
The story that you just told,
Correct.
let's talk a little bit about where it came from.
Sure.
Because this isn't just like, well, somebody told me this or it's in a book.
Right.
This is a conglomeration of hundreds of eyewitness reports, books written by the most credible people in the field, all kind of distilled by you into a narrative. Let's talk a little bit about how that originated and why we should be paying attention to what you're saying.
Well, it really boils down to how much do you trust your fellow human, right? The credibility of the eyewitnesses. These pilots, they were the ace pilots. That's why they were there at the Air War College in Montgomery, Alabama. They were the best of the best. And so, do we trust the testimony of a fighter pilot? I think we
are
should.
now.
I think we should. And the way this came up is, it was July 20th, 1969, when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. And one of the sons of Marion Magruder, when there was a commercial break, they both went out on kind of like the balcony, and they were looking up at the moon while Neil Armstrong is right up there, okay? And so one of the sons turns to the father, who is Marion Magruder, and he said, "I wonder if there's anyone out there." And the father turned to him and said, "We're not alone." And then he said, "Well, how do you know that?" "I can't tell you, but we're not alone." And that's kind of how he left it. And so over the years, before he passed away, he slowly let some things out, and that's how we got to this point right here. So ultimately, it boils down to, do we trust our top military pilots from World War II? Because they saw it.
How many witnesses altogether, credible witnesses to Roswell?
Well, Don Schmitt and Tom Carey have interviewed a total of 600 second and third-hand witnesses. Now, the number of first-hand witnesses is certainly a lot less than that, but just from what we've discovered here and talked about today, why would you have, if it's a weather balloon, 2 teams of 50 men over a period of 3 days crisscross the debris field and then finish up with industrial vacuum cleaners if it's a weather balloon? Doesn't make any sense at all.
No, it makes no sense at all.
Correct.
And back in the days when Don Schmitt was involved in this, but then Stanton Friedman also is another hero of Roswell revelations. Right. And back in those days, there were a lot of eyewitnesses still. Dozens, if not hundreds, were interviewed, and this is all documented. So, the Roswell, I jokingly call it the story that keeps on giving. It just never stops. We just finished shooting a show here with Paul Davids, where we went through the Roswell movie scene by scene and talked about how it's totally relevant, historically as accurate as Showtime would allow it, and with a few embellishments. But, that is the story of what happened, and there's a whole lot more people corroborating it than not corroborating it. And the official explanations we've gotten for Roswell are ludicrous at best.
That's true. That's
true. Crash dummies that fell through time. I mean, come on, Air Force, you can do better than that. Air Force, yeah, right. Call me. So we have another case. Well, we have a few.
Sure. We can go. You want to take another crash retrieval?
Yes.
Okay, we'll do another crash retrieval. I've got my binder here. So we've gone a little bit out of order, but it's okay because they're all part of the same story here. Let me take you back to 1941. This is April 15th, 1941, and we're going to go 6 years back prior to Roswell. This is the Cape Girardeau crash retrieval. And one thing I will mention is that there's a famous radio personality that you probably know about, and we all know him, Rush Limbaugh. Before he became Rush Limbaugh, that most people know about as a radio announcer, he was an umpire. And he was an umpire in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. And somewhere around 1997, a caller came into the show and said, Rush, you know, I've heard that there was this crash retrieval of a UFO in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and there were bodies recovered, and there was a debris recovered, and there was a craft recovered, and it was all hushed up by the military. Is there any truth to that? And there was this pause, and Rush said, there's more to that story than you know. He never said another word about it. So I think it's conceivable that Rush perhaps knew about it. So I'll set the scene here. It's around 10 p.m. at night, and I've got the MUFON journal here that talks about this. This is number 403. Reverend William Huffman is the primary eyewitness in this case. So at 10 p.m., he gets a knock on the door, and there's a police officer in the door. And the police officer says, Reverend, I believe we've got a crash of an aircraft. We could use your assistance. Would you please come with us? So he went into the passenger side of the squad car. They drove about 15 minutes across town to kind of this dark scene where it's a farm area. There were some farm hands there. The police had arrived. There was the beginning of the fire department arrived, but the military had not arrived at this point. So this is the first case where the military had not been on the scene. Now, what he saw was about a 35-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. It had come in at about a 45-degree angle. There was a hull breach on the side of the craft that showed, and now he saw it. This is from Reverend William Huffman. He looked inside this hole, and he said he saw switches and buttons and levers that kind of looked mechanical. There were 3 bodies associated with this retrieval. They were all about 3.5 to 4 feet tall. They had oversized heads. They were wearing a one-piece tight-fitting blue flight suit, and one was still alive. He got to that particular being in time, kind of kneeled over him, and this is what the crash scene looked like. If you can see this, you can see sort of the burning embers in the background. Now I want to take you to what the Reverend actually saw. Here he is, kneeling over the survivor. He got to the survivor within 60 seconds of him expiring. So it was very brief, but he did get there in time. At this point, the military had got on scene. They swore all of the farmhands to complete secrecy, absolute secrecy. But before that took place, there were a number of newspaper reporters that were taking photographs of this scene. And 2 of the farmhands picked up one of these dead alien corpses, supported it under its armpits, and outstretched its arms. And they actually took a photograph of this being, okay? Now, this particular photograph was handed down through the family, kind of like through generations, and somewhere, I believe in 1973-74 timeframe, this photograph was borrowed to someone who claimed he was a photograph analysis expert, and it was never returned. So what we tried to do is we tried to do a reproduction of what that exact particular photo looked like, and I've got basically some reproductions of what we believe it looked like, and this is based off of Charlotte Mann, who actually saw and held in her hand this particular photograph. And this is the reproduction of what that particular photograph may have looked like. Outstretched arms, supported under the armpits. And it was a smaller black and white photograph. It had scallops around the outer part of the photograph. And now here's the next question. What happened next? According to Paul Blake Smith, who wrote a book on this, there was no Pentagon in 41. That's true. So where do they hide it? At an underground vault basement at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. So here you see the 3 jars where the bodies were stored, and then some debris, and then part of the craft in the background. So this is under the basement section of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C.
Now, how many witnesses were there to this?
Well, there were farm people there. Reverend William Hoffman was there. The police were there. The fire department
and Reverend
and the
Hoffman
military.
actually told his congregation what he saw.
That's
Is that
exactly
correct?
That's exactly correct. Yes, he did. Yeah, he brought his family home. When he came home that night, he gathered everybody up and he said, I saw something tonight that completely changed my outlook on life. I'm going to say it once and once only, and I'm never going to talk about it again. And that's how that went down.
It's a very compelling story, and people have tried to debunk it over the years, but they haven't been able to fully debunk it, and some of the arguments against it are pretty weak. And plus, there's some pretty consistent eyewitness testimony coming from different angles, all telling the same story.
Sure. It's like before Roswell, there was this. When we get into the 42 time frame, now we're talking about the Battle of Los Angeles, which happened down the road here. So you can see how these crash retrievals started adding up. By 47, they could conceivably have had 4 crashes by then, under their belt and in possession at that time.
And that's just the ones that have a reasonable amount of documentation, or at least witness reports, not counting the ones that are more obscure, the number.
Well, the word is there's more crash retrievals than have been reported, for sure. Yeah, that's the word.
Now, I interviewed a guy that said he's plugged in, and he actually identified the name of the actual crash retrieval team and said that it does exist and has existed for a long time. Do you have any thoughts on whether or not there are crash retrieval teams that
Well,
operate
if you
worldwide?
go back to the information from Leonard Stringfield, he calls the team the Blue Berets. So I don't know if that jives with what your gentleman told me, but that's what Leonard Stringfield had talked about. Mm-hmm.
That's pretty interesting. And somebody had asked me, in fact, about 2 weeks ago, a team from a television outlet in Turkey was here, and they interviewed me here about this. And one of their questions was, this isn't just a U.S. thing. If it's happening all over the world, it's a worldwide thing.
That's correct.
And my answer to that was, the worldwide cover-up is a thing, and it's being managed by somebody, and I believe that the U.S. has made arrangements with practically every other country to manage this, and that this is managed from the deepest levels, and that's why we don't have other countries going, oh look, a saucer crashed here, here's the photographs. It's being kept under wraps in a way that would make cooperation by world leaders on any other thing look really, really good.
True.
It's like if they can all cooperate the way they are on keeping the UFO secrecy, we'd be living on a different planet. Do you believe that's true, that there is some kind of master organization that really runs this worldwide?
I think you worded that very well, because again, we're talking about the crown jewels here, and they're not going to release the data and the hardware and the debris associated with these crash retrievals anytime soon. It's not going to be an easy fight. So many people have come before us. They passed away without the truth being known. So are we going to let another 75 years go by? Or are we going to move this entire field forward and change the landscape?
We're moving this entire field forward as much as we can. Unfortunately, I believe that we are still under the constraints of whoever has been managing this information all along. And why are we going to move forward with it? I bring this up a lot, commercialization of space. There's the Webb telescope. I think that's a big deal. This thing's deployed in space. And probably by the time the audience is seeing this, there's going to be some pretty wild discoveries. The fact that you can get to other planets without being a government at this point, sometime soon, these are all motivators for getting the information out in a way people can digest it. And if you're going to stay in front of it, you have to stay in front of events, and you have to stay in front of realities. So these guys that have been keeping this thing a secret for as long as they have, they're in an interesting predicament, because they can't hide it any longer, because pretty soon it's going to be evident to all of us.
Right. That's right. It was classified higher than an atomic bomb during World War II. So we are really talking about the deepest secret within the government, for sure.
Did you know that right after the Roswell dates, the Army actually had a group called the Interplanetary Research Group? and that these guys' job was to research the potential for extraterrestrial life, and it got folded into Blue Book, but it did exist, and it's been documented.
So is this different than the Phenomenon Unit? Is this a different organization?
I think it's the same thing, the
It's the same
Interplanetary
thing. Okay.
Phenomenon Unit, yeah.
Yep, okay.
So, but not that many people know about that. And what even fewer people know about, unless they're in the field, is the fact that when Project Blue Book closed, that was not the end, that was the beginning. And so this whole story that we're getting about how, well, we closed Blue Book and that was pretty much it until ATIP. Yeah, right. And there's tons of evidence for that.
Cool, cool. Do you want to consider one more?
You know what? This is so much fun.
Yep.
You should have your own show. I'm going to help you with this. You're
Okay.
really good. And these presentations you're making are fantastic. So yeah, I could sit here until we run out of electricity.
Oh, that's fine, that's fine. Let's see, I have one more surprise for you, Ron, because you've done such a good job here. And you've inspired me, and I think you've helped a lot of people here. So I believe I've got one more surprise for you. I'm going to hit you with this, brother.
Oh, look at this.
Yeah.
When did you do this?
It's been in the works for quite some time, but finally made it available. So this is a brand new book called Dark Files, A Pictorial History of Lost, Forgotten, and Obscure UFO Encounters. It's all my best cases, it's all fully illustrated, and it's all referenced.
Oh, this is absolutely fantastic. I want to help you market this. Can I
Sure,
talk to MUFON
sure.
about putting it in their store?
That's fine, that's fine.
And I love this Blue Room Media.
That's right.
You must have been.
It's an homage to the Blue Room.
You must have been laughing when I brought
Well,
up the Blue Room during our other interview.
If you know, you know, right? Yeah.
This is amazing. Did you publish this yourself, self-published?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, this is fantastic. Of course, you're gonna have to sign it for me.
I already did.
You rock. Wow. So everybody, this is Dark Files. Tell people where they can get this.
It's on Amazon right now.
It's on Amazon? Okay, fantastic. This is beautiful. And this is most of these illustrations that you've already
All
shown
full color.
me.
Yep. Best of the best.
Wow. Oh, I can't really show the whole book to you guys because it's very complex, but this is amazing. And, Michael, only you could put out a book like this. You've done the work. The getting a drawing of this quality done is not an inexpensive.
Well, I work with some of the best in the world, so I can't claim credit for all of it. I'm just the one who has the desire and passion and is crazy enough to go down into these archives and dig this out. That's all. That's all my job is.
Look at the detail of these illustrations. Now, these are fine art quality pictures that Michael has commissioned. And tell us a little bit. You told me earlier you've had 3 different artists that have helped you.
Sure.
Let's talk a little bit about those guys.
Right. The only reason why these illustrations come out so well is because I'm working with people that are just the best of the best. Now, Tom Bogan has passed away, unfortunately. Now, he was a good friend of mine. I met him at a MUFON conference in Phoenix, and he showed some artwork, and it just went right through my mind exactly what I wanted to do. So we started drilling down on this 3-ring binder, and we started illustrating all these cases. That's what you see in this book here. And he was a Photoshop expert. And it's not like I pulled these cases from anywhere. I actually went down into the archives. I brought out the sketches. I brought out the file reports, the 3-page report, and the maps. Went over all that information with Tom Bogan. So what you see in this book are actually authenticated cases, and that's how it came about.
That is just incredible, and I'm just really I'm honored that you would gift me with this.
Sure,
so
yeah,
thanks
no
a
problem,
lot for
no
doing
problem.
that. There was a couple other cases like that we talked about earlier, and I know you've got some really great imagery.
Sure.
You want to go over a couple
Yeah,
more?
you want to do another crash retrieval?
Yeah.
Okay, fine, we can do that. Okay, so we've done Cape Girardeau, we've done Roswell. Of course, that's not the end of the line here. Let's keep moving forward in time, and we'll go on to the next crash retrieval case. It is March 25th, 1948, Aztec, New Mexico, approximately 16 miles east of town. And what happened in this case, ladies and gentlemen, is we've got a very interesting 99.9 foot diameter dish-shaped craft. It has about 6 elliptically shaped porthole windows. And if you look at the outer ridge here, there's a dome on the bottom and a dome on the top. The dome on the bottom is smaller than the one on the top. So we'll set the scene. The oil field workers got to this scene first before the military. So this is another one of those cases. And when they got there, they actually crawled up onto the rim of the disc, and you can see them here standing right at the base of the upper dome. And they're looking through these windows, a little bit hard to see, but they could see some detail. So what they ended up doing is they found that in one of these porthole windows, there was a small crack or hole the size of a quarter, and that's what we've got in this next illustration here. You can see the oil field workers are now at this location where they saw this crack in the porthole window. They go back to their truck, they pull out a pole, they stuck that pole through this quarter-size hole and started jiggling it around, and they activated some type of mechanism that opened up a hatchway on the bottom part dome of the craft. Once they got access to that, they walked inside the rim up to the upper dome, and ladies and gentlemen, they found two quote-unquote extraterrestrial corpses. They were laid over on their control panels, kind of on their seats. There were buttons and switches and dials on this control panel. Now there was pastel-colored iconology projected on the inside wall of the dome itself that you can see here, and you can see one of the oil field workers looking inside. So this is the scene back in 1948. What an incredible thing to find just sitting out there. At this point, the military gets involved. They bring everyone out of there, and they go inside, and they find in the outer rim 14 more bodies for a grand total of 16. You can see them laying out the bodies now in this particular illustration. There was a priest on hand. There was one senator on hand as well. So this is the military operation. And some of the civilians, before the military got there, there was a quick orbit of an Army helicopter that circled this scene. That's how the military got involved later. But the oil field workers who were interviewed by Scott and Suzanne Ramsey, they didn't know what was stranger. Was it the helicopter or was it the disc-shaped craft? Because they had never seen a helicopter like that before. So it's kind of a debate which one was weirder. Okay, so next thing that happened is, how do you move, and I'll ask this to you, Ron, how do you move a 100-foot diameter disc-shaped craft over the desert terrain?
Especially back in that day, it would be next to impossible.
Right. How would you do it? Well, they figured out somehow that there's a pin device that latches this whole craft together. And when you disconnect this pin device, all of these pie segments break apart into 3 equal pie segments. They started stringing cables under these pie segments. They were dragging them across the desert. They hoisted those pie segments onto the 18-wheeler tractor trailer, which is called the M25 Dragon Wagon, and then they brought those pie segments to Los Alamos, New Mexico, reassembled them, and began the reverse engineering process. So that's Aztec, 1948.
You know, I'm curious about something. What if they wouldn't have been able to separate that craft? What do you think plan B would be? Would they just bury it?
Plan B would have been buried at the site. That's happened before.
That's happened before.
Yeah.
You've heard stories about that.
That's correct.
I've had people reach out to me and tell me that they know where stuff like that's buried. They could take me there.
I wouldn't doubt it. I wouldn't doubt it.
You know, I haven't gone yet because there's usually some kind of something. You know, when it comes to proving these things, there's this thing I call the Jesus conundrum. Okay. There's always a reason why the photograph is gone, why the person can't tell us the truth. There's always some kind of reason why that ultimate, final, tangible piece of evidence isn't there. When I say it's the Jesus conundrum, because some of the reasons are just absolutely stupid. I've talked to people who have said, well, you know, humanity's not ready. And I'm thinking to myself, well, who the heck are you to make that decision? And so the reason I call it the Jesus conundrum is like the guy who says, hey, you know, Jesus is at my house. He's in my backyard. He's walking on water in my swimming pool, but now's not the time. And so this field is rife with that kind of thing, is that there's always some reason why something is gone, or why the one thing that would really just dot the I and cross the T is escaping us and eluding us. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that as to why that is? Because you'd think with all these hundreds of cases and over 100 years of secrecy, something would be out there.
Well, I got to go back to the World War II pilots that were in 1948 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Apparently, they didn't freak out completely. That caused them to go crazy, so they could handle it. Is it debatable where we could handle it? Certainly there would be some conflicts. Certainly there was probably be some spotty, sporadic things where people would be concerned. But ultimately, you still got to go to work Monday morning. Even if they did, you still have to go to work Monday morning. So life will go on. This is going to come out, whether the government wants to admit it or not. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. So that's kind of, they handled it. That's the big thing, is they could handle it.
You know, I've been asked, especially a lot lately, about, because there's been a lot of government research and documents and positions taken about the societal implications of this kind of thing. And, you know, a lot of people are like, well, society couldn't handle it. That's how it was back in the day when they first started looking into it. But now it's like, well, society could handle it. What I really think the truth to that is that society is going to handle it differently based on what it is. If it's, oh, hey, there's extraterrestrials, they're from another planet, they visit here once in a while, they're not bothering us, everything's cool, then yeah, everybody's going to go on and not even think twice about it, a lot of people. But if it's more like, well, you know, there's extraterrestrials, we're not sure of their intentions, we have some evidence that they might not be good, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it no matter what, well, then that's going to create a vastly different societal reaction. So when I'm asked about that, and I often am, it's like, yeah, maybe we can handle it, but you know, it really does depend on what it is, and maybe we can't.
And it depends on how they release it, okay? Because if they piecemeal it and they throw a little bit of disinformation, we're still no better off.
I know, and that's pretty much par for the course, standard operating procedure.
Correct.
So there was one other one that I saw you do.
Sure. Well, since we're here, we might as well continue on here in the series. So it's May 18th, 1953. This is the drawing based on the boots on the ground research by Harry Drew, who has to get credit. He's the premier researcher on Kingman, May 18th, 1953. This was about a 30-foot diameter dish-shaped craft, 14 feet tall. It had kind of these ridges around the outer circumference of the disc itself. There was a hatch on the bottom section here. And this is what the craft looked like prior to it coming down. This was not a crash retrieval. This was a forced landing, because they were experimenting with high-powered radar in Kingman at the time. When birds would fly through this radar range, they would drop dead immediately. That's how experimental and power was associated with this radar range. So you can imagine one of these dish-shaped craft, for some reason, it disrupted their navigation system, and it kind of did this leaf falling motion down, and that's how they retrieved it. So it really wasn't a crash retrieval, but it was a forced landing. So next thing that happened is, once they had the location of it, they brought in scientists from Indian Springs who flew to Phoenix. 15 more scientists joined the original. They boarded a bus, which was a General Motors bus, and they went on a dirt, dusty road through the desert into the Kingman, Arizona location where this took place. And there were 4 light owls when these scientists got there. And they were illuminating the craft from these 4 different angles. There was a tent at each corner of where the light owls were. And there was some residual propulsion still associated with this particular craft. Now, when the military got there, they found 3 beings that were somewhat humanoid looking standing next to the craft. There was another who was quote unquote the leader, and they did establish communication with these beings. There was an agreement made that the beings would go with the military on one condition and one condition only, that they are not separated. That was the agreement that was made. So what happened next is...
Now, is there any kind of reference to how that agreement was made?
I don't know, but it comes directly from Harry Drew.
Okay.
That there was some type of communication.
Because, they were able to communicate. Yep. A lot of people say that that's telepathy that they are able to communicate with, which makes perfect sense.
Yep, they definitely established some type of communication. So at this point, they brought the dish-shaped craft onto the 18-wheeler tractor-trailer, which was essentially the Dragon wagon, which is called the M25, and they were trying to move this to the remote test site in Nevada. But in order to do that, you have to cross the Colorado River, and you have got to get across the Hoover Dam. So what they brought is, they brought this barge, they floated it down the Colorado River, they brought the tank transporter with the disc on top onto this barge. They strung cables across. It's a nighttime, it's a chaotic scene. There's swearing going on, there's yelling. They've got to get this thing secured before daylight, and the cable snapped. And so you can see that this barge is now floating down the Colorado River, and it actually, according to Harry Drew, the outer edge of the disc-shaped craft made contact with the north wall of the Hoover Dam. So today, if you could go there, you might be able to see this mark where it made contact with the Hoover Dam. And the way that concluded is they made it to the other side, and the craft was brought to the remote test site in Nevada. And that's according to Harry Drew.
Wow. You know, as low as the river, as low as the river is
the way
right
it is now, you should
Yeah.
be able to see a mark there. Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's pretty fascinating. So these, these historic stories, and whether or not they're completely provable, I think once something has a certain amount of unrelated but consistent eyewitness testimony, it goes a long way. There's a perception of what constitutes evidence, and eyewitness testimony is certainly considered evidence, especially if it is overwhelming. And so, absent the smoking gun, there's always going to be people who say, well, we can't prove it. And I'm not even going to argue with those people at all, because they're right. But enough of this stuff is really, really compelling. And for lack of a better phrase, where there's smoke, there's fire. You can't have 100 reports of these kind of cases, some in vast amounts of detail, like what you've got here, without there being something to it. And as we fast forward to the whole thing that's happening with the Pentagon and the UFO reports, and all of the hyperbole about materials and crash debris, where the Pentagon will say one thing, then they'll change their mind. They had exotic materials here, there's exotic materials there, there's no exotic materials. Just the fact that they're chasing their tails, it's almost like Roswell case closed version 2.0. That's what we're seeing right now with the materials story. It is ridiculous.
Yeah, just go back to Leonard Stringfield. He interviewed people who were at the right place at the right time, and they saw a military convoy with one of these dish-shaped craft at night on the flatbed going into Wright Field, going into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Or another case where this gentleman, he was like a forklift operator. He saw a 4-engine cargo plane come into the base. They offloaded 3 bodies, and he got close enough to see him, and it's in the Leonard Stringfield report. So there's case after case and report after report of these type encounters, and they just can't all be discounted.
No, and it's all part of what we're going to be told at some point. But for me and for you and for a lot of other people, it can't come soon enough.
That's true. That's true.
Now, did you have some other really compelling cases that you
Yeah,
wanted to cover that aren't
we've got
necessarily-
one more that we can consider
Okay.
here. So this is December 1963, literally days after John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Daley Plaza on November 22nd, 1963. This Marine is called out of bed and told to get on board a plane immediately. This plane had no blacked out windows completely. He couldn't see where he was going. So they fly 3 hours from Cherry Point, North Carolina, to some undisclosed location. He didn't know where it was. Air Force facility, Navy facility, we don't know. He doesn't know. And when he got there, his job, because he was a U.S. Marine, he was kind of an MP, so he was guarding. That was his profession. He was kind of this military guard. They get to this facility. They open up either a large door or a large hangar door, and sitting on the hangar floor is this 40-foot diameter, 15-foot height, fat hamburger is the way to describe it. It had about 9 elliptically shaped windows wrapped around the outer circumference that they could not look through. That was mentioned too. And then if you look on the bottom here, there was this seam hatchway section where he said that you could not put a razor blade between the seams or crack of this hatch because it was so fully integrated into the craft itself. Now, you'll notice these red dots here. These are the locations of the attempted points of reentry into this craft. So the first thing they did is they tried a diamond tip drill bit. That didn't work. Now I should also mention, I'll skip ahead to the next drawing here. This is what the craft looked like when it was propped up on the scaffolding, because they built a catwalk where you could walk around this whole thing. It was built about 5 feet off the floor. So the second thing they did is they had an acetylene torch. That didn't do anything. Also, there was a white painted circle on the floor, and his job was to shoot to kill anyone who tried to breach that circle. And there was an admiral who was walking toward this craft who almost breached that circle and almost got shot. He was within about 2 seconds of getting shot. Here you can see these elliptical shaped windows. The third thing they tried to do is they brought in this 18-wheeler that had a trailer on the back, and it had an electrical power generating unit, and it was the power source for a laser, and that was fed by these 3-inch diameter cables that ran from the trailer to inside the hangar. And they were trying to breach the hull of this craft with this laser device, which is incredible. This is back in 1963. I wonder what how much power they could actually generate. When they moved the laser away, it was warm to the touch, but made no effect whatsoever. This is back in 1963. Now, the last day he was there, he saw this craft being loaded on a trailer. They were putting a tarp over the craft and then chains over the tarp, and it was being moved to the next location. So you can see one way they keep this secret and compartmentalize this is none of these crafts stay at any one place for any length of time. They keep moving it away. But now, all roads lead to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
All roads lead to Wright-Patterson. For, there's, for people that don't know, and you obviously know because you've put the moniker on the back of your book, Blue Room. Let's talk about the Blue Room. Right. What, supposedly that is the code name. And a lot of times anything that's top secret will be given the moniker Blue. They use it to describe top secret aircraft projects and many, many other things. Well, Blue is kind of a generic moniker for things that are deeply classified. The story is that at Wright-Patterson Airfield, they had the place underground, supposedly, where they stored the crash debris and all other UFO-related stuff, and that the nickname for it was the Blue Room. And that video, well, they didn't have video back then, but film of the Blue Room was shot and documented, and that numerous Freedom of Information Act requests to find out more about the Blue Room have at least shown us that there was documentation of this film being shot and that there's documentation that it was destroyed. But we know that film of the Blue Room existed, therefore the Blue Room must have existed. And so tell us what you know about the Blue Room.
All I really know about the Blue Room is that kind of what you mentioned. It is this mythical, legendary facility where the bodies, the debris, the crash from the Roswell incident was brought, and subsequent other crash retrievals were brought. Now, multiple people have tried to gain access to it. People like the caliber of Senator Barry Goldwater, who was a presidential candidate. He was good friends with General LeMay. And he basically talked to General LeMay and said, General, I hear that there's a facility at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base where you guys keep all this top secret UFO material, bodies, debris, craft. Can I go in there? So he turned to Barry and said, Barry, don't you ever ask me that question again, because if you do, I'll court-martial you and I can't even get in there. So it was a very harsh response, and he never got access to it. So if he can't get access to it, General LeMay can't get access, how are we going to get access to it? That's, I guess, the key here. And they've got to have the evidence there. There's got to be more than one location or library. Now, I've been told that there's another library at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. You wouldn't think so, but apparently that's another location where they have the 8x10 glossy black and whites, the color, the motion picture film reels, where they keep a lot of this information.
I heard a story secondhand, but it was an orientation at Wright-Pat where the guy, he'd just been stationed there, and he was told point blank, oh yeah, that's where they keep the aliens. And it was kind of like a joke, but they were serious. It's not even that big a secret if you happen to be in the little sphere around Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. My girlfriend worked for a company called Defense Electronics Supply back when she was, between 18 and 25. She arranged travel for top military brass. Defense Electronics Supply was right outside of Wright-Patterson. And the story that she has told me is that there was a time when she was arranging travel for these guys to Dulce International Airport. Now, And that it was common knowledge that there was an underground project going on at Dulce International Airport. Well, what's interesting is I checked, and there is no Dulce International Airport, but what I found out digging deeper is that there was. At that time, there was a Dulce International Airport. Dulce International Airport was closed and replaced by the airfield that's there now, which is on the Indian Reservation. Now, what's interesting about the airstrip that's there now, it is big enough to land the world's biggest planes.
Okay, C5?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So that adds a certain level of credibility to her story. But where I found the original references to Dulce International Airport, when I went back to find them again, they were gone. So, and it's going to take a trip to Dulce to figure it out. Right. The reason I chose to tell you that story is because it's no secret around Wright Pat that stuff's there. Mm-hmm. The details of it might be a secret, but it's common knowledge, and people accept it.
Yep, Leonard Stringfield has multiple witnesses who were there, who guarded the bodies, who were MPs, who had to be like downstairs guarding glass casket things, and I just don't think we can discount all these witnesses. I think there is a truth running through the tapestry of all these stories.
There absolutely is. Is there, now I know we've done a lot of your favorite crash cases. Is there any other case that you want to share with us?
I think we've covered the crash retrieval cases pretty well.
I think we have.
Yeah, I think we have. Mm-hmm.
So what's next for you with this?
Well, I've got my book here. My YouTube channel is growing subscribers, and I'm going to continue on that. And we're going to keep on doing illustrations and basically maintain an important part of our national history by making these cases come alive through the use of illustrations. That's the goal.
How many YouTube subscribers are you up to?
Right now, just over 4,000.
Okay.
So it's slow, but it's growing, and yep.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to help you. I'm going to make a promo for you,
okay.
And I'm going to put it on our MUFON YouTube channel. Between
okay.
my MUFON YouTube channel, which is MUFON's, but I run it. Right. Then I also have a couple other channels. I've got well over 100,000 subscribers just there.
Wow.
And then on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, I'm up to 350,000
wow.
in likes and follows.
Okay.
And this isn't people following Ron James. They're following the MUFON stuff that I do. And so I can't take personal credit for those kind of numbers, but it is a lot of eyeballs.
Okay. Well, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
And I'll give you a copy of this show.
Thank you. Yeah.
You can post it on your own YouTube channel too.
I'd appreciate that.
In fact, I'll probably make you a custom version of it just for you.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Thank you, Ron. I appreciate that. That's great.
Well, I appreciate you coming out and sharing this information with us. It's really fun.
No problem. It's a crusade. It's a crusade. So.
I did, like this whole studio. It's my other work that pays for it. I've never made any significant money doing anything in ufology. I've been tapping around the basement since 2008.
Okay.
Shooting interviews, many of which are sitting on, I've got over 100 hard drives sitting in cabinets of interviews that have never seen the light of day.
Really? Wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've just been doing that with, I'll make some money doing a rock concert or whatever, doing a music video project, and then I'll take that money and I'll spend it this way. Just like you got your day job and you're spending your money doing stuff like this.
You invest it back into the artwork. Yep. Back into the research. Definitely.
Yeah, well, we have to do it. And I don't know how I got sucked into it, but to me, the biggest questions facing humanity, life after death, nature, reality, the ET question, I just can't think of any place else I'd rather put my energy.
I agree.
It's going to illuminate a pathway for future humans that is vitally important, especially in this day and age.
Yep, there's so few people actually doing it. It's a small group for sure.
And now it's gotten worse because since the field has gotten so big and gotten some credibility and gotten some worldwide exposure, now it's just a whole lot of people trying to cash in. And that's really a shame to see because there's some really bad stuff getting put out there. And what I'm noticing is that credibility is not the main factor. It's sensationalism. And more people will believe an absolutely ridiculous far out story and gather around it than will believe just a simple straight up the middle, let's stick with what we can prove. And so hopefully that changes.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Hopefully history remembers people like you.
Hope so.
Michael, thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks a lot. Great.